I had no emotional boundaries. My family still doesn't have boundaries. And I didn't either. I grew up as a child with no emotional boundaries. I didn't see emotional boundaries. I didn't know what they were. I literally didn't know they even existed until literally 3 or 4 years ago when we started this emotional growth journey. And what happens is when you have no emotional boundaries, you cross other people's boundaries because you don't know there is such a thing as boundaries. And you're typically completely unaware that you are crossing other people's boundaries. Ask me how I know. Because it took me a while to figure out, again, and I said a while, decades, not like, oh, it took me a couple minutes or a couple hours. No, decades before I even realized that I was doing this. And you allow yourself to be mistreated, used, abused, and walked over because, again, you have no boundaries for yourself either. So you're not aware of others' boundaries, you're not aware of your own boundaries, and you end up feeling violated and you're not even sure why. You may walk away consciously or unconsciously feeling like, wow, something just didn't feel right about that interaction, or wow, that felt a little off, or man, what just happened? You've got this kind of weird feeling. And again, like me, there were many times where I maybe felt something, but I wasn't even aware that I felt something. Which again, some of you guys are like, dude, seriously, you were that emotionally clueless? Yes, that was me. No joke.
Welcome to the EQ for Entrepreneurs podcast. Like most business owners, you already know you need good business and marketing strategies to scale and be profitable. But at some point, you've hit the dreaded wall where you feel stuck and frustrated. EQ for Entrepreneurs is for business owners and leaders who are honest enough to admit that they just might be the ones holding their business back and are brave enough to change that.
We're Noble and Kathy, and every week we're having candid conversations about all things emotional intelligence and how growing that has allowed us to get out of our own way and is radically transforming both our businesses and our personal lives. This is the secret sauce strategy for modern entrepreneurs who are tired of hustling without seeing results and want to grow a business and a life that they love.
What is going on, entrepreneurs, leaders, and influencers? Super excited about today's episode, and I pray it super impacts you in a big and powerful way and really convicts you like it's convicted me. So I've got my notes. So if those of you that are watching on YouTube, thank you for watching, first of all, on our YouTube channel, or if you're listening on the podcast, thank you for listening to our podcast. Again, they're both called EQ for Entrepreneurs. Also, I want to thank all the folks that have gone through and have taken our EQ course, our 8-week course on growing and building emotional intelligence. We're collecting some great stories and testimonies of actual life change and transformation. For those of y'all that aren't in our membership, thank you all so much. Again, it's been so exciting to go and grow through this emotional growth journey alongside you all, and to play a small role in that journey has been really exciting. Today, we're going to talk about the three consequences of unaddressed emotional issues. Now, there are probably 100 consequences for unaddressed emotional issues. I'm only going to cover three specific consequences of unaddressed emotional issues. And again, I've got my notes, so if you see me looking down, that's why. So, and as for those of you that have been following our journey for a while, you know that I'm very transparent. In fact, the reason this whole podcast started was I wanted to share all my own emotional junk in my trunk and share my corresponding, lessons learned along my emotional growth journey. So, okay. So now here's the other thing too. Before I jump into these three consequences of unaddressed emotional issues, for those of you all that feel like you're at a spot, a place, a phase, a space in your life right now where you feel like you're ready to take your emotional intelligence to the next level, check out our course. register for our course at eqforentrepreneurs.com/EQA, eqforentrepreneurs.com/EQA. And let me just share one of the stories from one of our most recent EQ course grads. He's an emergency room doctor, ER doc from Australia. How cool is that? Super guy. He's been an ER doc for 8 years now. And after his second week in our EQ course, he shared a massive epiphany about how he was responding to his spouse, his partner. They had gotten in a kind of a what I call an intense family fellowship, and the way he responded to her was very over the top in their intense family fellowship, in their argument that was going on, their conversation, their argument. And he realized he had made a connection that it was the way and how he responded and reacted ultimately to his partner was a result of how he was treated in his childhood and how he saw conflict being modeled in his home and how he was treated as a result of how his family handled conflict in his home. And he said it led to some very important breakthroughs in their relationship as a result of having some very deep conversations after he kind of blew up. He apologized to her and really said, man, honey, I'm so sorry for how I responded. I realized that the reason I reacted this way was, again, as a result of how I was treated as a child. And he said he would not have had that epiphany had it not been for some of the conversations and discussions and lessons that he learned going through the first couple of weeks of our EQ course. So that was super exciting to hear. And now he has been so much more, now he's graduated from the course and stuff, but he has been so much more aware of how he's treating her and relationships in general, professionally and personally. Now, another story comes from a super lady. She's a veteran homeschool mom. She's been homeschooling for, I want to say 14, 15 years now. She's a firearms instructor and an entrepreneur. They have multiple businesses. And one of those is they recently started a school. And, in this, COVID times that we've been in, they saw a need for, a lot of families that are wanting some other alternatives for schooling, educating their children. So they started a school. She said the EQ course equipped her with some emotional tools that enabled her to move through some very difficult and have some very difficult conversations with some challenging parents that she would have normally handled very differently, if not avoided altogether. She would have handled very, very differently had it not been through her, her going through the EQ course. So again, for those of you that feel like you're ready to take your emotional intelligence, your emotional health to that next level, register for our course at eqforentrepreneurs.com/EQA. And so far, 100% of the folks that have gone through our course, our 8-week course, have said that it has transformed and changed specific areas of their life that they would not have been able to change or have changed as soon had they not, again, taken our EQ course. So that was super exciting to hear some of those testimonies and stories for me personally. Okay, 3 consequences for unaddressed emotional issues. Number 1, typically, again, let me use my own story, my own self as an example. I had no emotional boundaries. My family still doesn't have boundaries. And I didn't either. I grew up as a child with no emotional boundaries. I didn't see emotional boundaries. I didn't know what they were. I literally didn't know they even existed until literally 3 or 4 years ago when we started this emotional growth journey. And what happens is when you have no emotional boundaries, you cross other people's boundaries because you don't know there even is such a thing as boundaries. And you're typically completely unaware that you are crossing other people's boundaries. Ask me how I know. Because it took me a while to figure out, again, and I said a while, decades, not like, oh, it took me a couple minutes or a couple hours. No, decades before I even realized that I was doing this. And you allow yourself to be mistreated, used, abused, and walked over because, again, you have no boundaries for yourself either. So you're not aware of others' boundaries, you're not aware of your own boundaries, and you end up feeling violated and you're not even sure why. You may walk away consciously or unconsciously feeling like, wow, something just didn't feel right about that interaction, or wow, that felt a little off, or man, what just happened? You've got this kind of weird feeling. And again, like me, there were many times where I maybe felt something, but I wasn't even aware that I felt something. Which again, some of you guys are like, dude, seriously, you were that emotionally clueless? Yes, that was me. No joke. Number two, the second consequence for unaddressed emotional issues, you don't know where you begin and where you end and where someone else begins and where they end. So you can get into codependent and very emotionally immature, very, very emotionally needy relationships that end up being very unhealthy. In other words, there's this deep enmeshment in the relationship or in relationships where you can't live with them and you can't live without them. There's this unhealthy entanglement or enmeshment, an unhealthy dependency on a relationship, or again, multiple relationships that can just lead to very unhealthy relationships. And one or both of you will inevitably, it's just a matter of time, end up hurt. And in that scenario where both parties, or even at least one party, is very emotionally immature or has never grown emotionally, there's a great chance that relationship could end up damaged indefinitely, or at least for a very long time. Do you know anyone either in your family or friends that aren't on speaking terms anymore? Or if they do speak to each other, it's very uncomfortable and awkward at best. All because one or both parties are very emotionally immature and they don't have the emotional intelligence or emotional coping tools to work through or overcome that challenging relationship situation or that conflict. What is the opportunity cost? The relational and social opportunity cost for that relationship being stunted for weeks, months, years, or decades, or for the rest of I have actually heard of families who they got an emotional injury in their 20s, 30s, and did not speak until they died. They never resolved the conflict. So decades, for literally, I've heard stories, for literally half or more than half of their lives, they never developed that relationship ever again because of a lack of taking ownership and responsibility for their own emotional growth and or lack thereof, emotional intelligence or lack thereof. And as a result, that relationship and really multiple relationships were damaged or severed entirely for the majority of their life. And what's that opportunity cost? And so that's a kind of a business term. What opportunity cost is it means what is being missed out on as a result of that relationship being stunted or severed. And guys, is it worth it? Is it worth, again, and I've done this. I have done this. I have allowed pride and ego to continue the consequence of my own emotional immaturity and emotional unawareness lack of awareness. Okay, number 3, the third consequence of unaddressed emotional issues, and again, there's probably 100 of them, but I'm just doing 3 right now. And I say this a lot if you've been following our podcast for a length of time, unaddressed emotional issues don't get better over time. They actually compound. I'm going to say that again. Unaddressed emotional issues do not get better over time. They actually compound over time. Do you know anyone like this? I can tell you 2 or 3 people, 4 or 5 people off the top of my head right now who are literally living this out right now, today, real time. There are some folks I'm fairly close with that still have not dealt with emotional injuries after 20, 30, 40 years. And guess what? Not only has the relationship not improved, shocking, like, wow, I can't believe that I'm not in shape and I haven't worked out in 5 years or 10 years or 15 years and 20 years. Why am I not in better shape? And I haven't done anything. It's the law of entropy, right? Did I just use a law of physics in a relationship emotional context? It's the law of entropy in relationships. If you don't work on it, newsflash, it's going to get worse over time. So not only has the relationship not improved, but it has gotten worse. The emotional injuries just keep piling up like trash in a massive trash mountain until one or both parties takes ownership of their emotions and feelings and their consequential emotional growth and emotional healing and emotional intelligence growth. The trash heap of emotional injuries will continue to grow and continue to overflow into every single area and aspect of their lives. The damage to not only their life, but to the lives of everyone they touch will also be impacted by this ever-growing emotional trash heap. And the sad thing is that typically none of the people who are getting the consequence or overflow or secondhand smoke of that emotional immaturity or lack of ownership and responsibility, when they're getting hurt, a lot of times the people who are getting hurt by the one who's carrying around all this emotional baggage will realize that it's not them. So I mean, sometimes they'll think it's them. Sometimes they think, oh man, I'm the one that's causing this pain. When it's not them, it's the person that's carrying around all this unaddressed emotional baggage and emotional trash heap around with them. And here's what else happens. So the person who is carrying around all this emotional baggage and unaddressed emotional issues is they begin to lash out at the people they love the most, and in many cases, it will have nothing to do, again, with their loved ones and everything to do with all the unaddressed emotional injuries that keep piling up year after year, decade after decade. So the injured person not only dies a death of 1,000 emotional paper cuts, but finds an emotional sword to swing at everyone around them. And not because there's something wrong with everyone around them, it's because they're dying a death of 1,000 emotional paper cuts. And so because of that, you can either be bitter or better, but you can't be both. So are you going to allow yourself to become bitter and jaded and allow your heart to be hardened? Or are you going to, at some point, take ownership and responsibility for your emotional growth and emotional healing, get help, seek help, so that you are not only, so you can stop injuring yourself, hurting yourself, and you can also stop hurting everyone around you, your loved ones, because you may or may not be aware of the consequences of that pain, that unaddressed emotional baggage that you're carrying around. You may not know how you're hurting yourself or others. I wasn't. I had no idea all the different ways that my emotional baggage was causing me pain and limiting my life and hindering me. I had no idea. And as Daniel Hagedorn says in our interview, episode 59, How to Raise an Emotionally Healthy Family, if you don't deal with your emotional issues, your family, friends, and coworkers will. if you don't deal with your emotional issues, your family, friends, and coworkers will. Everyone, ready for this one? Everyone pays a price for your emotional unhealthiness. Everyone pays a price for your emotional unhealthiness. So remember, emotionally healthy people help heal other people emotionally. If you feel like you're ready to invest and take your emotional health and emotional growth to the next level, check out our course, register for our course, our 8-week course, where we come alongside you for 8 weeks as part of your emotional growth journey, emotional intelligence journey at eqforentrepreneurs.com/EQA. eqforentrepreneurs.com/EQA.